What kind of man risks his whole reputation for a woman the world says he should never want? That question beat through Wyatt Carver's mind the night everything in Dry Creek changed. Wyatt had never been the type to chase trouble. He'd grown up on the wide Wyoming plains, raising cattle with a steady hand and a quiet heart. Folks said he was reliable, decent, the kind of man a woman could trust. But life had a way of teaching a man that trust alone couldn't keep loneliness from settling deep in his bones. 2 years earlier, he'd buried his wife Hannah beneath the cottonwoods near the creek. Her death had cracked the world clean open. Wyatt had kept the ranch running for their little boy James, who hadn't spoken a single word since losing his mama. The child clung to Wyatt's pant leg like the world was something waiting to hurt him again. Wyatt didn't complain. He just worked harder. But there were nights when the silence in that ranch house felt like a weight on his chest. Nights when even the creak of the windmill sounded lonely. What kind of man risks his whole reputation for a woman the world says he should never want? That question beat through Wyatt Carver's mind the night everything in Dry Creek changed. Nights when a man wished for a warm voice, a warm smile, a warm hand on his cheek, reminding him that life wasn't over yet. And every time that emptiness got too loud, there was one place his mind went. The Scarlet Lantern Saloon. More so, the woman who ran it. Mara Holt. Everyone in Dry Creek knew her name. Some whispered it with judgment, some with envy, some with the kind of bitterness that comes from wanting what you can't have. She was the widow of the saloon's former owner, a man who died in a card game dispute. Since then, she'd run the place herself with a firm spine and a sharp tongue. The men respected her, the women didn't, and the church folk pretended she didn't exist. Wyatt had seen her only a handful of times, usually from afar. But once, during the harsh winter when he'd ridden into town for feed, she had helped James when he'd slipped on the icy boardwalk. What kind of man risks his whole reputation for a woman the world says he should never want? That question beat through Wyatt Carver's mind the night everything in Dry Creek changed. She'd picked the boy up gently, brushed the snow from his coat, and whispered something that made him stop crying. Wyatt had never forgotten that moment, not the soft way she'd looked at his son, not the ache it stirred in him. But he had a ranch to run, a boy to raise, and a reputation to protect. No decent rancher wanted his name tangled with the saloon widows, or so he'd told himself. Until the night everything went wrong. It happened in early November. The cold had settled deep, the kind that chilled bone and earth. James had been coughing for 2 days, but that evening his breath turned shallow and tight. Wyatt didn't think twice. He wrapped the boy in a wool quilt, saddled his horse, and rode hard into town. The doctor's office was dark. He pounded on the door. Nothing. A passing man shook his head. "Doc's over at the Scarlet Lantern tonight." What kind of man risks his whole reputation for a woman the world says he should never want? That question beat through Wyatt Carver's mind the night everything in Dry Creek changed. Something about checking the piano girl's wrist after she slammed it in a door. Wyatt's jaw tightened. He didn't want to step foot in that saloon. He didn't want the stares or the whispers or the rumors that would follow. But James wheezed again, small and fragile against his chest. Wyatt took the steps toward the lantern glow. The door swung open before he could reach for it. Mara stood there, framed by warm lamplight and the low hum of voices behind her. Her auburn hair was braided over one shoulder. Her dress was modest, though worn, and she carried herself with a strength that made the whole room take notice. Her eyes went straight to the bundle in Wyatt's arms. "Come inside," she said. "No hesitation, no judgment." Wyatt stepped in, the warmth hitting him like relief. Men glanced up from their drinks. A few whispered. One muttered, "Rancher bringing his troubles where they don't belong." What kind of man risks his whole reputation for a woman the world says he should never want? That question beat through Wyatt Carver's mind the night everything in Dry Creek changed. Mara shot that man a look sharp enough to quiet him. "Put him by the stove," she told Wyatt, already moving to clear space. "The doctor isn't here," she added, "but I know enough for now." Wyatt hesitated, looking around at the eyes on him, the murmurs passing through the room. Then James coughed again, small and shaking. Wyatt followed her. Mara knelt beside the child, her fingers gentle as she unwrapped the quilt. She checked his chest, listened to his breathing, then sent one of the girls for warm broth and another for fresh water. "He's cold down deep," she said softly. "Cold can turn cruel if you don't fight it quick." Wyatt swallowed. "I shouldn't have brought him here." "You brought him where he needed to be," she said without looking up. "That's what matters." The noise of the saloon disappeared around them. What kind of man risks his whole reputation for a woman the world says he should never want? That question beat through Wyatt Carver's mind the night everything in Dry Creek changed. It was just her, him, and the child she tended like she had every right to care. James slowly relaxed in her arms. His wheezing eased. Wyatt's breath did too. When the doctor arrived an hour later, he nodded in approval. "She did right by the boy," he said. Wyatt glanced at Mara. She didn't look proud, she just looked relieved. When Wyatt prepared to leave, Mara stood from the stove, brushing her palms on her apron. "You can bring him here any time," she said. "No one scares me off, and no one tells me who deserves help." He opened his mouth, unsure what to say, but she wasn't done. "And Wyatt Carver," she added quietly, "you don't need to be afraid of what people think. Folks in this town talk. They always have. But talk doesn't raise a child or warm a home." His chest tightened. "I appreciate everything," he said, truly. "I know," she answered. "I can tell when a man's speaking from his heart." What kind of man risks his whole reputation for a woman the world says he should never want? That question beat through Wyatt Carver's mind the night everything in Dry Creek changed. Wyatt walked out of the saloon that night with James in his arms and a truth he could no longer shake. Mara Holt wasn't what people called her. She wasn't trouble. She wasn't immoral. She was the only woman who'd looked at his son with real tenderness since the day Hannah died, and the only woman whose eyes made something inside him feel alive again. The town could talk all they wanted. Something had started. Quiet, small, dangerous, and real. And Wyatt Carver knew one thing as he headed into the cold night. This wasn't the end of the story. This was the moment everything began. What happens when a man finally stops caring about whispers? That question hung over Wyatt Carver like a gathering storm as the days after that night rolled on. James slowly recovered, but he stayed close to Wyatt's side, and even closer to Mara whenever they were in town. Something about her calmed him. What kind of man risks his whole reputation for a woman the world says he should never want? That question beat through Wyatt Carver's mind the night everything in Dry Creek changed. The townspeople noticed, of course. They always noticed everything. By the second week, the gossip had grown legs. Men muttered outside the feed store. Women whispered behind hymn books. Wyatt didn't pay attention until one Sunday morning, when he stepped into church with James. A tight-lipped woman named Mrs. Greeley leaned toward her friend and whispered loudly enough for the whole front row to hear. Poor boy. First his mother gone. Now being dragged into that saloon woman's shadow. Wyatt stiffened, but he kept his head down. The last thing he wanted was a scene. He moved down the aisle, but then James's small hand tugged on his coat. The boy looked up, eyes filled with confusion and fear. He didn't speak, but Wyatt could read him just fine. "Is she talking about Miss Mara?" Wyatt set his jaw. He lifted James, held him tighter, and walked right back out the church door. What kind of man risks his whole reputation for a woman the world says he should never want? That question beat through Wyatt Carver's mind the night everything in Dry Creek changed. If the town wanted to judge him, they could judge him, but they wouldn't do it in front of his son. That afternoon, he saddled his horse and rode James into town, not for supplies, not for business, but because he had something inside him that needed a place to settle. The Scarlet Lantern. Mara was behind the bar polishing glasses, her hair braided over her shoulder in that loose, practical way that made her look softer than she'd ever admit. She looked up, surprised. "Wyatt, you here for the doctor?" "No," he answered quietly. "I'm here for you." Her brows lifted. "For me?" Wyatt nodded. Could use some coffee, if that's all right. A shadow of a smile touched her mouth. Always. She poured 2 cups, one light for James, one strong for Wyatt. They sat at the back table, away from the card players and the noise. Mara didn't ask questions. She just watched him, waiting. Wyatt finally spoke. What kind of man risks his whole reputation for a woman the world says he should never want? That question beat through Wyatt Carver's mind the night everything in Dry Creek changed. They're talking. They always talk, Mara said gently. I stopped caring years ago. I haven't, he admitted, not until today. Mara set her cup down, her expression still patient. What did they say? Wyatt hesitated, but lies weren't in his nature. That I'm dragging James into your shadow. That, being around you, is wrong. Mara's face didn't break, but something deep in her eyes flickered, not hurt, something older. Something she'd carried long before he ever walked into her saloon. I see, she said quietly. Wyatt leaned forward. Do you know what James did when he heard it? Quote, she shook her head. He looked afraid, Wyatt whispered. Afraid they were talking about you. He's never looked afraid of you, Mara. Never once. Mara swallowed. Children don't see dirt where there isn't any. Wyatt's voice lowered. Neither do I. What kind of man risks his whole reputation for a woman the world says he should never want? That question beat through Wyatt Carver's mind the night everything in Dry Creek changed. For a long moment she stared at him, unsure if he meant what she wanted him to mean. Wyatt held her gaze, steady, certain. Something shifted between them, the kind of shift that closes one path forever and opens another one no one can ignore. The moment was cut short by a sudden crash. The saloon doors slammed open. A ranch hand stumbled inside, clutching his bleeding forehead. Mara, trouble, down the alley, he gasped. Couple men asking where you are. Didn't look friendly. Mara's shoulders tensed. She moved fast, pushing open a drawer behind the bar. Wyatt saw a small revolver glint inside. He stepped closer. You know them? Quote, I know the type, she said. Trouble with a name. Wyatt handed James to one of the serving girls. Keep him safe in the back room. Lock the door. James clung to Wyatt's shirt, but Wyatt squeezed his small hand gently. I'll be right back, son. I promise. What kind of man risks his whole reputation for a woman the world says he should never want? That question beat through Wyatt Carver's mind the night everything in Dry Creek changed. Then he turned to Mara. I'm coming with you. No, she said quickly. They're looking for me, not you. Wyatt shook his head. Doesn't matter. I'm not letting you face anything alone. Her eyes softened with something like disbelief. Wyatt, this isn't your fight. Yes, it is, he said firmly. It became mine the minute you held my boy by the stove. Mara stared at him. The saloon noise faded around them. Even the lamps seemed to hum quieter. And then she nodded. The two slipped through the back door into the cold evening air. The alley smelled faintly of dirt, smoke, and rain. The sun was dipping, turning the sky purple. At the far end, 2 men waited, one tall and heavyset with a cruel smirk. The other thin, jumpy, the kind who liked to start trouble but not finish it. Mara stepped forward first. You're a long way from where you belong, she called out. State your business. What kind of man risks his whole reputation for a woman the world says he should never want? That question beat through Wyatt Carver's mind the night everything in Dry Creek changed. The bigger man laughed. Mara Holt, heard the stories. Didn't think you'd be this, pretty up close. Wyatt's hands curled into fists. You got 10 seconds to speak your reason, Mara warned. Or we're done being polite. We're looking for someone, the man said. Your late husband owed folks money. Someone finally came collectin'. You got something. That belongs to us. Mara's face didn't move. I don't owe you a thing. Oh, but we say you do, the man replied with a grin. And we're here to take it. Wyatt stepped forward. You won't be taking anything, not from her. The tall man sized him up. "And who are you?" Wyatt didn't blink. A man with nothing left to fear. Silence fell. Then the big man reached for his gun. He didn't get the chance. Wyatt moved first, knocking the man back into the wall, just as a shot cracked through the alley. What kind of man risks his whole reputation for a woman the world says he should never want? That question beat through Wyatt Carver's mind the night everything in Dry Creek changed. Mara ducked, firing a warning shot at the second man's boots. Sparks flew. The thin man bolted. The big man swung, but Wyatt slammed him into the ground, wrestling the gun from his grip. Mara aimed her revolver at the man's chest. "Tell whoever sent you," she said evenly, "that Mara Holt isn't alone anymore. And if they come back, they'll regret the day they ever heard my name." Wyatt stood beside her, breath sharp but steady, protecting her like he'd been doing it all his life. The man scrambled to his feet and ran. The alley fell silent once more. Mara's hands shook as she lowered her gun. Wyatt stepped closer, gently taking the revolver from her grip. "You all right?" he whispered. She looked up at him, breathless, shaken, but strong. "I am now." Wyatt reached out, brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear and held her gaze. "Mara," he said quietly, "they call you immoral. What kind of man risks his whole reputation for a woman the world says he should never want?" That question beat through Wyatt Carver's mind the night everything in Dry Creek changed. "They call you trouble. But I know your core. And you're the one I—" Her breath hitched, but before he could finish the words, the back door burst open. James ran out crying, shaking with fear. He threw himself into Wyatt's arms. Wyatt held him tight, heart pounding. Mara stepped close, her hand resting on James's back, her voice soft and steady as she whispered, "You're safe. Both of you are safe." Wyatt looked at her. Something final snapped into place inside him. This woman, this moment, this family that wasn't yet a family. He couldn't walk away now. He wouldn't. What does a man do when the whole world tells him to walk away, but his heart tells him he's already home? Wyatt Carver found his answer in the days that followed the alley fight, though he didn't know it at first. Trouble didn't end that night. The two men who'd come for Mara were only the beginning. What kind of man risks his whole reputation for a woman the world says he should never want? That question beat through Wyatt Carver's mind the night everything in Dry Creek changed. Word spread quick in small towns, and it wasn't long before more strangers drifted through Dry Creek asking questions. Some were curious, some were dangerous. All of them carried the same message. Mara's late husband had left behind debts and enemies, but Wyatt never let her face a single one alone. He began riding into town twice a day, once to check on supplies and once just to see her, even if he stayed only a few minutes. At first he told himself it was for safety, for James, for decency. But Mara saw the truth in his eyes long before he admitted it. One evening, just after sundown, Wyatt saddled up and headed into town again. James sat in front of him on the saddle, bundled tight in Wyatt's coat, his small hands gripping the horn. The boy didn't speak, but he watched the lights of the saloon ahead with a calm he never had anywhere else. Inside, the Scarlet Lantern was quiet. What kind of man risks his whole reputation for a woman the world says he should never want? That question beat through Wyatt Carver's mind the night everything in Dry Creek changed. A few men played cards. The piano girl practiced a soft tune, and Mara polished the bar with slow, distracted movements. Her eyes lifted the moment she saw them. "You came," she said softly. "Thought it best," Wyatt replied, lifting James down. "Didn't want you working, late by yourself." Her smile was small, grateful, tired. "I never asked you to look after me." "I know," he said, stepping closer. "I'm doing it anyway." She laughed then, a soft, surprised sound that warmed something deep inside him. They talked while James sat near the stove drawing shapes in the dust with his finger. Mara poured Wyatt a cup of coffee, but he barely touched it. He watched her instead, watched the way her hands moved, the way her shoulders eased when she wasn't pretending to be stronger than anyone else in the room. "You know," she said quietly, "most men who come here see what they want to see. A saloon widow. What kind of man risks his whole reputation for a woman the world says he should never want? That question beat through Wyatt Carver's mind the night everything in Dry Creek changed. A woman who should have made different choices. Someone easy to forget when they ride away. "Is that what you think I see?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "Sometimes." Wyatt shook his head slowly. "I see the woman who saved my boy's life," he said. "I see the woman who stood in an alley with a gun in her hand to protect people who weren't even hers. I see someone who's braver than any person in this town." Her eyes glistened, but she blinked fast, not willing to let a tear fall. "Wyatt," she whispered, "you don't owe me anything." "Maybe not," he said, "but I want something, all the same." Her breath caught. "And what's that?" He stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth of her breath, close enough that every fear she'd ever carried rose to the surface. "You," he said. The word was soft, final, true. Before either of them could speak again, a sharp knock rattled the front doors. What kind of man risks his whole reputation for a woman the world says he should never want? That question beat through Wyatt Carver's mind the night everything in Dry Creek changed. Loud, rough, wrong. Mara stiffened. Wyatt moved first, reaching for the rifle leaning against the counter. He motioned James behind the bar and positioned himself between Mara and the door. The knocking came again. Wyatt cocked the rifle. "Who is it?" Mara called, though she already knew. A voice answered, low, angry. "Open up, Mrs. Holt. We are finishing what we started." Wyatt's eyes hardened. "Get behind me." But Mara didn't move. "This is my saloon, my fight." He shook his head. "Not anymore." The men outside shoved the doors open. Two strangers stepped in, bigger than the last pair, armed and confident. The kind who thought towns like Dry Creek were easy to bend. But they weren't expecting Wyatt Carver. One raised his gun. Wyatt fired first, a warning shot that shattered a lantern inches from the man's head. Flames flared for a moment, then died under Mara's heel as she stomped them out. What kind of man risks his whole reputation for a woman the world says he should never want? That question beat through Wyatt Carver's mind the night everything in Dry Creek changed. "You fire again," Wyatt warned, "and I swear you won't like how I answer." The second man lunged forward, grabbing Mara by the arm. Before Wyatt could react, James stepped out from behind the bar, his small face twisted in fear. But this time, fear didn't freeze him. For the first time in almost 2 years, the boy found his voice. "Let her go," he shouted. Everyone in the room froze. The man holding Mara loosened his grip just enough. Wyatt took the opening. He slammed the man backward into a table, knocking the gun free. The other stranger lunged, but Mara snatched a bottle from the bar and cracked it across the man's arm. Wyatt brought the rifle grip down across his jaw. Both men scrambled to their feet and ran, tripping over chairs as they fled the saloon. Silence followed. Thick, stunned silence. James stood trembling in the middle of the room, eyes wide, chest rising fast. What kind of man risks his whole reputation for a woman the world says he should never want? That question beat through Wyatt Carver's mind the night everything in Dry Creek changed. Wyatt crouched down and took his son's face gently in both hands. "You're all right," he said. "You're all right, son." James shook, then whispered, "I didn't want them to hurt her." Wyatt felt something break inside him, a dam he'd held tight since Hannah died. He pulled the boy into his arms. James clung to him, crying into his shoulder. Mara pressed a hand to her mouth, tears slipping down her cheeks. "James," she whispered, kneeling beside them. "Thank you." The boy reached for her, burying his face in her dress. Mara wrapped her arms around him, her fingers trembling in his hair. Wyatt looked at the two of them and knew. He knew the truth as clearly as he knew the shape of his own hands. This was his family. Not born, not expected, but chosen. When James finally calmed, Mara looked at Wyatt through tear-bright eyes. "Wyatt," she said softly, "we can't keep living in fear. Not you, not me. What kind of man risks his whole reputation for a woman the world says he should never want? That question beat through Wyatt Carver's mind the night everything in Dry Creek changed. Not him. I know, he whispered. So what now? She asked. Wyatt took a slow breath. Then he rose to his feet, took her hands in his, and spoke without doubt. Now I make it right. You're comin' home with me. You and my boy belong under the same roof. Her breath hitched. Wyatt, people will talk. Let 'em, he said. I'm done livin' for their comfort. Her voice trembled. And what do you want for yourself? Wyatt stepped closer. He cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. I want you, he said again. Steady, clear. They call you immoral, Mara Holt. But I know your core, and you're the woman I want beside me. Not in secret, not in shame, in the open, as mine. Her tears broke then, quiet, relieved, overflowing. She nodded once, then again, and again. Yes, she whispered. Wyatt kissed her, slow, certain, with all the years of loneliness finally lifting off his chest. What kind of man risks his whole reputation for a woman the world says he should never want? That question beat through Wyatt Carver's mind the night everything in Dry Creek changed. That night, they rode back to the ranch under a sky scattered with stars. James slept against Mara's side, her arms wrapped around him like she'd been loving him all his life. Wyatt glanced at them both as they rode. The saloon widow and the mute boy who found his voice for her. And he knew, without a single doubt, that everything the world had tried to tear apart had come together exactly the way it was meant to.